My name's Nick Williams. I'm a barrister at Morgan Sports Law, which is a sports boutique specialising in representing professional athletes. And I'm also the managing director of DotX Talent, which is a gaming and esports talent management agency that sits within Morgan Sports Law's group.
Before we begin, it's important to know that I am actually signed to DotX. They are the agency that represents me, which means Nick, who you're going to hear from, is the barrister that goes through all my contracts, deals with all of my legal needs and things like that. So I wanted to get that out of the way right now. But the reason I wanted to talk to Nick today is because I've learned so much from him in the last year. And he's taught me so much about being professional in the space, which we talk about in the episode, where I just realized that sometimes, one, it's okay to say no. Two, that being professional and presenting yourself and asking for certain things is not being a diva or demanding. It's simply just setting a precedent to ensure a healthy business arrangement. We're going to get into all of this in the podcast. Nick is not normally in front of camera. He's usually the guy behind doing a bunch of work, and I'm really grateful for his time. He's busy, but he's obviously given us some insights into being an esports lawyer, but also transitioning into a business owner. And I think you're going to find this really interesting, especially some of the conversations around contract law, the similarities between sports and esports and all of that. So before I spoil the whole thing, let's jump right into it. The first thing that I would love you to explain to people listening or watching, what is the difference between a barrister, a lawyer, and an attorney?
So in the UK, we have a separated profession. So you're either a solicitor or a barrister. A solicitor has primary conduct of a client's matter. So they deal with most of the kind of day-to-day with the client. They will do a lot of the correspondence, the paperwork, things like that. Barristers are more there to kind of provide specialist advice and also to do advocacy at hearings. So if you go to court in the UK, although there are some solicitors who have rights of audience in courts, generally what you'll see barristers arguing about stuff. So in the UK, at least, we have this distinction between two different wings of the profession who do slightly different jobs for the client when it comes to their legal case. That's not the case everywhere. So actually, I think probably most other jurisdictions, like the US, France, Germany, I'm probably wrong about some of those, but most other jurisdictions, they just have kind of attorneys or lawyers who will do everything. So they'll be involved in all parts of their client's case. It's really kind of a historical distinction. Some countries have it, some don't.
It's very interesting because in South Africa, where I'm obviously from, you have lawyers, but then if you want to go to court and have someone argue on your behalf in court, then you need an advocate. So I'm presuming similarity. Okay. Yeah, very similar.
Yeah, that's the same kind of thing, it sounds like.
And advocates cost a lot more money, this I know. But there we go. That was just to kind of explain to anyone listening. But now I'm curious in terms of what it is that your job is. So what exactly is it that you do?
So I do two things. As I said at the start, I'm a barrister at Morgan Sports Law. So when I'm doing that job, I represent clients of the firm on a kind of range of different sports matters. If it's a contentious matter, so a case that's going to court, I will draft submissions, I'll input on evidence, and then I'll also go to the hearing and represent the client, give submissions on their behalf, do cross-examination, evidence, things like that. If it's on a non-contentious matter, then my role tends to be more on the kind of advisory side, though I have necessarily over the years, I've sort of picked up a lot of drafting. So I won't just sort of advise on a contract, I'll actually get involved in drafting that as well. I normally work in a team alongside some other lawyers and that kind of thing. My class is managing director of DotX Talent. I guess like most people working in a small business, I wear a lot of hats. I lead the business, so that's both kind of like the commercial strategy of what we do and promoting team culture. I do the financial planning, projections, reporting, that kind of stuff. And then I also have a certain amount of sort of operational responsibilities, stuff that keeps the business going. I guess there's a kind of crossover between what I do at Morgan Sports Law and what I do at DotX, in that quite often I'm advising DotX clients in my capacity as a barrister at Morgan Sports Law. But they kind of meld together to a certain extent. So I do a lot of legal stuff for DotX clients as well.
Was your plan always, I mean, to get into sports law? Was that something you were passionate about, and was that your goal when you went to study?
No, not at all. I mean, I won't say my entire career has been a sort of series of fortuitous accidents, but it definitely wasn't planned from day one. My background as a lawyer was primarily as a kind of a general employment commercial lawyer. So it's only when I joined Morgan Sports Law in the start of 2020 that I started representing professional athletes. I mean, there's certain bits of law that sit around sport that are unique to sport, but a lot of what I did before you could translate into the space of sport, and it wasn't totally alien. So too with kind of esports and gaming. My background as a lawyer, has been very easy to translate into a new industry in a new space. Did I start off from wanting to be a sports lawyer from day one? No, but I've always loved sport and competitive things generally. It's something I really enjoy doing. Personally, I love watching sport, so it's kind of cool to be able to work with people in that space. Generally, people who reach the kind of top tier of anything, be that sport or anything else, are kind of interesting people. They have cool stories. So as clients, they're interesting to work with, and having that kind of personal interest alongside, the legal interest in what's going on, adds another kind of layer to it.
I'm curious though, so you go from sports to esports. Are you a gamer? Were you playing games? I feel like your answer to this question might be different to many of the other people that I've interviewed. I mean, because most people got into esports and their career because they were passionate about esports, but I wonder if that was the same for you.
I mean, I've always played games. I grew up, I played a lot of CS as a teenager. I only really kind of got into esports as a thing with StarCraft 2 and GSL. I still play games in my free time. I watch some esports, I guess. I watch some League of Legends, but I don't have time to keep up with it every week now. So generally kind of international competitions. It's not been like the single thing that I've always wanted to do and be involved in, but I like it. It's one of a lot of things I like doing. So it's a cool thing to be able to do more of and be involved with on a day-to-day basis.
It must be interesting though, going from sports law, where I know some of your clients, you work with these major brands, these major sporting stars, and sports that are very developed, well known, into esports, which, I mean, did it feel a little bit like the Wild West when you entered the esports arena?
Yeah, it's definitely different. Though you'd be surprised. There's a lot of Wild West that happens in sports as well. I would say, obviously, like if you're dealing with a major sports star, the value of what you're dealing with tends to be higher. And then, perhaps when there's money involved, always the expectations are slightly different and slightly higher. But fundamentally, the kinds of thing you deal with are the same. It's the same issues that tend to occur, and the same kinds of things that you're talking about. I guess the major difference is normally if you're dealing with a major athlete or a major team, there's lawyers involved on all sides. That's never the case with esports and gaming. I'm generally the only lawyer in the room, and that kind of presents some interesting challenges. Like the conversation I will have with the lawyer is very different to the conversation that I necessarily need to have with a non-lawyer about something. There's a certain sort of level of things that might be understood by a lawyer that wouldn't necessarily be understood by someone who isn't. And I tend to think people who aren't lawyers tend to be a bit suspicious of lawyers. They tend to think they're out to kind of get them or, screw them over in some way. And that's really not how I see it. Like, obviously my job is to put my client into the best position possible. But that's not at the expense of like screwing someone else over. It's all about trying to get to a deal which everyone's happy with ultimately.
It's interesting to give anyone watching or listening some context. Obviously, like I mentioned at the start, Nick is part of the DotX team. They look after me. And I think people are sometimes afraid of him because I've seen you jump into an email thread, maybe just to query a line in a contract or something. And the concept of a barrister or a lawyer getting involved, it is terrifying because a lot of people they go through their whole life never having to deal with a legal professional in any way. So it is terrifying when they see it coming. Did you have to learn a lot going into esports, or was it pretty much similar to the set of skills that you already had, or was there things that you had to necessarily level up with?
So on the fear thing, actually, sometimes that's kind of helpful. Sometimes, as I've already said, it's a little bit unhelpful because people are, they get their guard up and suddenly they don't want to have a conversation with you as they might do with Mitsuko, who's a non-lawyer. But yeah, if you really want to get someone to do something, sometimes it's quite helpful to be like, hello, this is a lawyer who's going to scare the pants off you unless you do what we want. On new skills, yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I didn't do a lot of this kind of influence marketing stuff when I was at Morgan Sports Law. Primarily, I was a disputes lawyer. So that's people having arguments about stuff. So I've had to kind of hone my skills on some of that stuff. It's not totally alien to me. It's something I'd had some background in, but it's what I do every day now. I've done hundreds of influencer marketing deals over the last year and a half. So it's become much more of my bread and butter, day-to-day legal work. So yeah, it's been a learning process. I think there's probably some soft skills I developed as well. As I said, I'm so used to talking to lawyers that suddenly having to sell things to a broader audience is its own challenge. And then obviously kind of like setting up and running a business is something I've never done before. I was a self-employed barrister, so I have some experience of kind of developing a client base and thinking about that kind of stuff, but actually kind of launching a brand, something that's bigger than just me, was a pretty big and new challenge for me. Obviously I'm assisted and I work with some amazing people who've helped make that possible as well. Mitsuko, obviously, you work with closely, and the rest of the team, they're all great. So it's as much their baby as mine. But yeah, that's definitely been a big new challenge for me as well.
That was something I wanted to bring up because throughout this podcast, I've been interviewing different people with different jobs, and the majority of the people I've spoken to, there is a step. So either they've gone from doing a specific job and then starting a company, or they've ended up leaving a corporate job to freelance. And ultimately, when you're a freelancer, you're still running your own small company. It's like a whole different set of skills, though, that aren't unique to esports or gaming. This is something that you have to learn when you're running a business. Did you find that difficult at the start, or was it more of a challenge for you?
I think, yeah, it was a challenge, but I think I've also had the luxury of being able to do it in an environment where there's relatively the space to make a few mistakes without it being mortally wounding to what you're doing. So DotX is a subsidiary of MSL. It's been funded by MSL up until this point. Obviously, it makes money itself now, but it's still there, and it gets a lot of support from that business. And people who run MSL obviously have experience of, Mike and Lizzie have experience of setting up their own law firm, setting up their own business. And there's a sort of support team of professionals that sit within that who can feed back on stuff that you're doing. So it's a little bit scary setting up this new thing. Obviously, I don't want to take kind of an idea to Mike and Lizzie and then it completely fail, but it hasn't at all. It's doing well. Hopefully we'll continue on our current trajectory, and we're growing every day, adding new clients, adding new team members. But yeah, it's been quite a kind of supportive environment in which to create a new thing. It's not been that my house isn't on the line. I guess is what I'm saying. We've been able to do things in quite a nurturing environment, more of a kind of like sandbox to allow us to build the business that we wanted to build.
I feel terrible because obviously Nick doesn't normally talk to a camera. This isn't his normal thing. He's normally behind doing all the contracts and things. And I sent him a list of questions, and I've realized I've gone completely off the questions just because I find what he does so fascinating. So I apologize in advance, Nick. But I was curious from a representation point of view, because this is something that I don't think it's new, and I think a lot of people know that it's important, but so many people don't go this route because they're worried about the financial implications. Why should someone in esports, whether it be broadcast talent or a content creator or a player, why should they have legal representation?
So I think it a little bit depends on, as in the reasons why you would want that. A little bit depends on what you're like as a person. But I think fundamentally what it gives you is someone in your corner who will ensure that when you enter into an agreement, it's the agreement that you think you're entering into, and that the consequences when something doesn't go to plan are fair. I'd probably have given you a better answer if I'd have thought that
I know. I realize
so I'm
that.
doing it a bit on the fly. But the number one thing that I encounter when I look over a contract for someone is that there are things in there which haven't been discussed or haven't been agreed, and that can be as simple as there being extra deliverables that would normally be paid for, like, I don't know, it would be exclusivity for a certain period, or the right to use your image to promote products for a period, or boosting or something like that, that haven't been factored in when you have priced yourself up for that deal, but have just been thrown in there 99% of the time just because companies use standard form contracts that have the kitchen sink in them. So you can end up giving away quite a lot of stuff which is valuable to you without realizing. And unless you're very careful in the way that you read your contracts and do your dealings, it's quite easy to sell yourself short on stuff. Now, you don't necessarily need to be a lawyer to pick up all of that stuff, but it helps. I think if you've got another pair of eyes on a contract who is accustomed to looking at contracts, knows where things would normally fall, where they wouldn't fall. I think the other benefits, as I said, it's to have someone there to help craft the consequences of when something goes wrong. So if something doesn't get done in accordance with the contract, what actually happens to you? Now, on a fairly minor level, that might be, I don't know, for like a broadcast host, someone not getting breaks or not getting food when they're at an event or something, and we will know that we will make sure that in someone's hosting contract there's stuff that they have a rider that makes sure they're treated properly when they're at an event, or it could be something more fundamental, like what happens if you don't get paid. And as you will know, Sam, different people take different attitudes towards actually paying bills. And if you have a lawyer there who's thought about what happens if that doesn't happen, that can be very helpful to you when sort of applying some pressure on them to get them to pay the bill. So there's a range of reasons that you might want to have a lawyer involved. That said, I would say that generally lawyers, unless it's a very high value contract, are expensive. It's obviously the USP of DotX that if you're a client of ours, it's kind of wrapped into our commission. So it is insanely cheaper than getting a lawyer to do it independently. So yeah, I guess those are the key benefits. That was a slightly rambling explanation, but those are the key things, I think.
It was perfect. And obviously, I think what we took out of that is if you want legal representation that doesn't cost you an arm and a leg, sign up with DotX. But no, that wasn't the sales point. So I'm curious from the esports perspective, because I know you do a lot of athlete contracts as well. Would you argue that maybe if there was more legal representation in esports, it could be a safer space for everyone? Or do you think that's, I mean, whether or not you have a lot of legal professionals getting involved, you're still going to have those situations where certain people are taken advantage of?
I think certainly on the side of the player or the athlete, it helps having expertise on your side, and it helps having some support and a team in your corner. As to lawyers being involved more generally, yeah, I think professionalism does help. any industry, be that esports or anything else. And having people who know what they're doing when it comes to contracts is probably only going to be a good thing, because again, it means when something goes wrong, everyone's thought about what should happen and why, and it means that everyone's expectations about contracts are set in the right place. Obviously, lawyers aren't a solution to everything. You can be lawyered up to the eyeballs on both sides, and people still get into arguments about stuff, and people still get mistreated. It just means there's a more obvious route for dealing with that stuff when it happens. So yeah, I think having more lawyers or more professionalism in esports generally, it's really going to be a good thing. I think we're a long way off every player having a lawyer. I'm not sure we'll ever get there, to be honest with you, because I'm not sure the money's going to be there. But I don't think it hurts that there are a few.
It's interesting because I felt I've been with DotX for a year now, and I felt the shift where it was very difficult for me in the beginning, because the way that I did things was I was kind of a bit of a yes girl. And so like if someone asked for something, I never said no. And there is a level of professionalism that comes in when you've got someone saying, actually, no, you're not going to be, there's a clause in this contract that's really actually not safe for you. And yes, the chances are no one's ever going to reach the point where this clause is going to come up. But from a professional point of view, we need to remove it. I mean, that's conversations you and I have had. And I do think it levels you up from an industry point of view, because I've also learned a lot, and I've realized that actually you don't have to agree to everything, and you can push back on certain things. And I think it creates a better environment for everyone. But that's obviously a long conversation about contract negotiations for another day. This is a pretty obvious question, I think, for me, but maybe someone who's listening or watching, you obviously have to study to get where you are. You need to get a degree. What did you study? You went to university. How long did that take as well before you could practice?
So in the UK, you don't have to study law as an undergraduate degree to become a lawyer. Probably half of lawyers don't do that. So my undergraduate degree was in philosophy, of all things. I'm not sure I've used that much since, but it's a useful degree to teach you how to think around problems and to think laterally. I then did something called the GDL, so it's a graduate law degree. It takes 1 year, and that's basically a 3-year law degree condensed into a single year, so it's quite intense. After that, I did the bar course, which again is another year, so we're up to 5 years at this point. And then after that, I did, well, actually, I then had a year working for a litigation funder, which was a legal job, but not as a sort of fully qualified lawyer. Then I did something called pupillage, which is the kind of practical element of the barrister training. So you spend 6 months basically shadowing other barristers, seeing them go to court, watching what they do, helping them do their work, sort of helping you, will kind of like draft their skelly, and then they'll tear it apart and tell you all the things you did wrong, and then show you how you should really do it. And then the next 6 months is called your second six, so it's on your feet. So you actually get sent to court, you have your own pieces of work. It's still under supervision of another barrister, but it's sort of controlled, so you can't mess anything up too badly. After that, you're on your feet and you're free to practice. So I guess all in all, that's 6 years plus. I had another year of working. So yeah, it's quite a long road to get to being a barrister. And then I've been a barrister for quite a number of years now. I've had, maybe particularly in the last few years, a slightly unconventional career. For most of my first few years, I was in chambers, and then before moving into MSL and then DotX, which is so far away from where I maybe thought I would be originally, but I've been very happy with those decisions, and I'm pretty happy with where I've ended up.
It's such an interesting journey, and I love that this is something that comes up with a lot of people where they kind of fell into esports. It wasn't really like a focus thing, and now they're here, they really love it. It does lead me though to a question that's completely different to that, which is, what would you say is the hardest part of your job?
The hardest part, I guess probably alongside, having to deal with, as I said before, people being inherently suspicious of me, or maybe a little bit scared on some level. There's a lot of stuff that happens like very last minute. That's always been the case with being a lawyer. You just get thrown something like, an hour before it needs to get done, and that's stressful. But to be honest, I'm pretty used to that. It's not terribly family friendly. I have a daughter who needs taken care of in the evenings, but my wife's also a lawyer, so sometimes that's a bit interesting, but we manage it well. Other than that, I can't think of anything. I mean, there's lots of stuff which is challenging, but it's rough that you take with the smooth, and generally it's a pretty good gig.
And what would you say is the most exciting part about your job?
I think probably a couple of things. The first thing is getting to be a small part of our clients doing cool stuff, being part of their journey. Seeing them achieve stuff that they've really wanted to achieve, or like a major project coming off, that's quite rewarding. Even though what we do is really just stands behind all that, it's still really cool to see someone do the thing that they really wanted to do. That's great. I suppose the other thing is kind of seeing DotX as a business succeed. That's just fantastic. It started off as this tiny idea, and then when Mitsuko joined, we really fleshed it out, and watching it kind of grow into something that is kind of known for the right reasons, and is really building a good reputation for itself, and doing some cool stuff is very cool.
Is it weird where like the transition from, obviously when you were a barrister and you said you did a lot of litigation, which is normally negative, your clients are coming to you under duress, they're probably not happy all of the time, moving into DotX where a lot of it is very positive, where you're kind of constantly like celebrating wins? Is it weird changing between the two? Because I presume for a lot of times when you've got clients coming to you for litigation, they don't want to get you involved. They're miserable. They want to fight. Whereas on the other side, it's a very positive type of thing. Do you find that jump around difficult to deal with?
I think it definitely was a change. As you say, like in litigation, when people first come to you, at least generally it's because they're in a bad place and having a bad time and having an argument which is very acrimonious and they don't really want to be involved in. Obviously, if that translates through to a win, they tend to be very happy, so it's rewarding. But not having that same kind of vibe underlying what you do, when it's everyone trying to work towards something good, is less stressful. Like in the UK, we have an adversarial system, so you're always at the throats of the other side, and that can often seem or get quite personal between lawyers on opposite sides of the dispute, whereas that's obviously much less the case with the non-contentious stuff we do at DotX and deals. Everyone's trying to work towards something good. So yeah, it's definitely nice to be involved in something where people are doing stuff they're excited to be doing. They're wanting to talk to you about the thing that's going on, the contract or whatever it is, rather than having to talk to you because if they don't, like, they're going to have a problem. And it was a big change. It's a big paradigm shift. But again, I still do some of the litigation stuff, so I get a nice balance.
And then the final question from left field, because I know I've literally thrown you under the bus this whole interview, and you've handled it very well. So well done on that. But
You're too kind, Sam.
is it difficult? I don't know if difficult's the right word, but obviously in esports it's very international. So you're dealing with a lot of different entities all over the world. If it's players, it's obviously different organizations that might not be UK based. For someone like me, I'm working with different organizations all over the world. Does it become difficult from the contracting point of view with that? Because as we spoke about right at the start, different legal systems run differently, or is contract law somewhat universal?
So it's the case in sport as well that it's very international. So you're not, obviously the nature of the advice that you're providing on a contract governed by a legal system in which you are not qualified is necessarily different. If you've received an email from me about, which I know you have, about a contract that isn't governed by English law, you'll know that I say that, this isn't, I can't advise you on South African law. But on a kind of fundamental level, contracts say what they say. And although different legal systems might treat certain things differently, you can still go a long way by making sure that what the contract says on a kind of common sense commercial level is what you want the parties to agree. So where I can, I try and get contracts into English law and governed by English law, because obviously it's a space where I'm much better equipped to advise a client on what might happen if something goes wrong, or what the pros and cons here are. Also, generally speaking, we like to work from our contract because it's something that we know inside out. It's pretty fair, it's pretty balanced. It shouldn't be something that's too controversial. Sometimes people don't want to do it, they want to use their own contracts. But look, I still, even though I can't give advice on American law, whatever it is, I think there's still a lot of value that can be given in terms of that kind of like commercial view, from having looked at a lot of different contracts from all over the place as to what it's worth fighting about, what it's not worth fighting about, and I can still talk in headline terms about what might happen if X or Y or Z were to happen.
And then, if you weren't doing this job, what do you think you would be doing?
I have absolutely no idea. What would I be doing if I weren't doing this job? I think, I've got these friends who have just bought a farm in the middle of nowhere, and they're just doing that, and it seems like the most amazing life. So I'd probably go do something completely crazy. Well, I say that, I'd probably be running another business. I don't know. But I'm always tempted by the idea of, just sacking it all in and going and living in the middle of nowhere and farming alpacas or something like that. I don't know.
I think you say that, but your job is one where it's obviously quite dynamic, and I mean, it's high stress a lot of the time, but I think the dynamic craziness of it is what potentially, I'm psychoanalyzing you now, but potentially attracts you to it. So I think the alpacas will get boring very quickly. But now, if there is anyone listening or watching and they want to find out a little bit more about what you do, or maybe they want to pick your brain, where can they find you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter at Nick W. Barrister, which I can see is in my little label under the screen. I'm on LinkedIn, all the usual networks. I'm pretty inactive on social media, but now and again I like to get involved in an argument on it, so I'm sure you can find me somewhere.
You've been watching or listening to Tech Girl Talks, and if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out some of the others that have also been released for season 4. The whole theme is That's My Job, and you can find some really interesting people talking about what they do in the esports and gaming industry. And of course, if you enjoyed it, I have to tell you, hit subscribe on whichever platform you're on, give it a review, leave a comment, all of that jazz. And if you want to chat to me a little bit more, you can find me on social media at TechGirlZA pretty much everywhere.